We've all heard the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back. You load a massive animal with heavy hay, and eventually, one single piece of straw brings the whole thing crashing down. But think about the logic hidden inside that idiom. That last piece of straw weighs a fraction of an ounce. Because it feels practically weightless on its own, it is easy to assume it has zero mathematical effect on the total load. This brings us to a specific logical trap, known as the fallacy of the continuum. It happens when an arguer assumes that small movements along a continuum, like the difference between two tiny points on this gradient, have completely negligible effects. The flaw here is relying on an unacceptable premise. The arguer assumes that because 2 points right next to each other look identical close up, it is impossible, or at least totally arbitrary, to make definite distinctions anywhere along the line. If you accept that premise, the logic unravels entirely. You trick yourself into the absurd belief that extreme opposites, like pure white and pure black, are practically the exact same thing. This numerical model represents a monthly credit card bill. Right now, it sits safely in the green at $300. Let's say you want a new cell phone. Putting it on the card adds $25 a month. And the monthly service plan? That is another $60. It is incredibly easy to justify these purchases. Moving from $300 to $325 is a tiny hop. What is $25 in the grand scheme of things? Those isolated, negligible additions successfully hide the reality of the situation. By treating each small jump as meaningless, the total bill has climbed to almost $400, pushing the user's financial state completely into the red zone. This chart shows a standard academic grading scale from 0 to 100. A rigid pass-fail line is drawn right at 60. Right now, a student is sitting below it with a 54. Suppose the professor adds a generous 5-point curve to the entire class. The student jumps to a 59. Immediately, they argue that since the professor already added 5 points, they should add 6. After all, what is the real mathematical difference between a 59 and a 60? The student actually has a point. The difference in psychological knowledge between a 59 average and a 60 average is microscopically tiny. Drawing a hard line right in that exact spot feels incredibly arbitrary. But strict cutoffs must be enforced. If we refuse to draw a line simply because the intermediate differences are small, the extreme concepts of passing a class and failing a class become entirely indistinguishable. Think about the dieter who argues that one more donut won't ruin their health, or the smoker reaching for just one more cigarette. I want you to pause the video right here. Look at these two scenarios and identify the exact unwarranted assumption being made. The false assumption in both cases is that consecutive small indulgences have literally zero effect. Follow that logic to the end, and you reach the absurd conclusion that a lifetime of bad habits yields the exact same health outcomes as strict physical discipline. When you spot this logical trap in a debate, you can dismantle it using a conversational tactic called the absurd counterexample. Let's trace it out on this flowchart using the rich person method. First, ask your opponent to define the exact dollar amount that makes someone a rich person. Let's call that X. Next, subtract a small amount, say $1,000, from that total. Ask them if someone with X minus $1,000 is still rich. Because the difference is so small, they will still say yes. Now repeat the question. Subtract another 1,000 and another. Apply their own rule that small differences don't matter to force them down the continuum step by step. Eventually, your opponent backs themselves into a corner. They are logically forced to admit that someone with exactly $0 is still classified as a rich person. By forcing the arguer to accept a completely ridiculous outcome, you prove that their foundational premise is broken. The idea that small changes don't matter shatters under scrutiny. Let's review. The flaw is assuming small steps don't matter. The reality is that practical distinctions must be made. And your defense is the absurd counterexample. Drawing a line between passing and failing, or hot and cold, will almost always feel a bit arbitrary at the edges, but real-world outcomes like passing your final exam or winning a championship depend entirely on those single vital points.